I hope you enjoyed this morning. Thought Chris was fantastic, and Ruel, obviously, both keeping it real, which is, I think, a bit of a theme, if you like, for this next session that we've got coming up for you. I work for the WFA, and most of my contacts are in global roles. And they, of course, see the benefit of centrally created work, including the creative, which is what we're going to be focused on today. But their local colleagues, so their national colleagues, don't necessarily always agree. And you can find examples very easily where global creative or taglines has been horribly misinterpreted locally. So a famous one from KFC, as you may know, their tagline is "finger licking good," was translated in China into "we'll eat your fingers off." So kind of a zombie convenience food, I don't know. But, or the Jolly Green Giant, you might have known them. So in Arabic, had been translated into "intimidating green monster." I'm not sure that's the best way to get the kids to eat their vegetables, but anyway. And finally, Purdue Chicken, an American brand, I believe. They had this is my favorite. I don't know if this translates, but hopefully it does. The original tagline was, "It takes a tough man to make a tender chicken." In Mexico, that was translated into, "It takes a hard man to make a chicken pregnant." Anyway, you get the point. This is not, however, this session is not about mistranslation, although some of the examples are probably pretty horrific. Our debate is going to be looking at the bigger picture in more brands around the world, including in Japan and around Asia, look to leverage their global scale to produce work. Is that necessarily a smart choice? And I would like to define this debate as travelability. Now, the English speakers in the room will know that that's not a word, because I just made it up. But hopefully, it helps to explain what we're talking about. This is around whether content and creative can travel and be effective in markets around the world. I'm going to apply now perhaps one of the harshest benchmarks, if you like, and very related to Chris's presentation about keeping it real, is about focusing on emotion. What John Kieran, if you know a company called System 1 that we work with a lot, would call feel more, do more. So, as I said, very related to this morning. And the premise being that if your content doesn't trigger emotion, then it is far less likely to be effective. You may have seen that excellent sizzle reel from our friends at Unruly. And they do work around this as well. So they basically do online video testing, so usually on a sample of about 500 people. And they capture unconscious responses through biometrics, so using webcams, and considered responses also via the survey. So I'm not going to go into huge detail on the methodology, but I am, thanks to Unruly, going to share just 3 examples to help frame this discussion. Firstly, Toyota's most recent model, using the same ad that was tested in all of these markets. Actually, this was an example video which performed well pretty much across the board. US, Japan, Australia, Brazil, slightly different results by market, but really the response were positive. So probably what you want is a good case study of a centrally developed creative. But here's another example for you. So this is from Bodyform, and a feminine hygiene product. And it got a great emotional response in Singapore and India, and was considered highly inspirational. That's what that face says, inspirational. So as you see, considerably above the norm in most markets. And for a Western marketer, we're talking about global marketers here from around the world, you might say we're probably going to get very similar results in other markets around Asia. But before I share with you, I'm just going to actually try and share the video so you can see what I'm talking about. Yeah, so I hope you agree, pretty powerful stuff. I don't think I'm in the target audience for that, but certainly invoked an emotional reaction from me. So you'll recall that I said in Singapore and India, the overwhelming reaction was inspiration. But basically, when you look at it and then look at the results for Japan, interestingly, it was a very different story. The overwhelming response from that was very different from the other markets. It was actually discussed, which, interestingly and coincidentally, referring back to my similarities between the UK and Japan, actually they weren't hugely dissimilar in terms of their results. It wasn't hugely positive there, I understand, either. Some global creative has consistent results, others do not. So hopefully that's helped to frame what we're going to be talking about today. I'm really delighted to welcome our debaters on the stage, so please feel free to join me as I introduce the debate. The motion is global creative equals local disaster. So first up, you should be able to see Yukiko Yamaguchi, who, having previously worked with IBM and Cisco, she is now Director of Enterprise Marketing Division from Panasonic. Yuki, as I now call her, please come on stage, as we're now old friends, of course, aren't we? Brings a wealth of global and local experience, so please take a seat. Go Sahara, over here, brings many qualities to this debate, along with having, I think, the best name ever in marketing, so welcome to the stage. Go is a creative director of Death of Bad, his company is called, and having previously worked with many agencies, Hokuhodo, JWT, and has boasted clients, I believe, including Apple and Nike. He is another Japanese national, but is actually based in Los Angeles, and we're delighted he was able to join us here today. So this team agree with the motion, right? So we've got this straight. They basically, let's call them the local team for now, the national team. But on the right-hand side, we have two other superb marketers. Naomi Yamamoto is the Chief Creative Officer from Shiseido. She's held roles in the USA, in Insights role in China, but is now, as I said, Global Chief Creative Officer based here in Tokyo, and we're delighted she agreed to join us today. And finally, last but not least, Sam Ahmed is Global Head of Digital and Retail Marketing from Standard Chartered. Sam is based in Singapore. There's a very impressive CV, having worked for MasterCard, Starbucks. And Sam is also the chair of our CMO Forum in Asia, so he's a good friend of the WFA. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage. So, hopefully you understand. This team on the left agrees, they represent local. This team on the right disagree, they represent global. Now, especially for the press out there, but for those of you, please keep in mind, but before we move on, smart marketers like you know there's no such thing as black and white, right? And the team who have kindly agreed to come up here obviously don't feel concretely one way or the other. So what they say on stage, really they've taken a leap of faith to help us with this, to represent both sides. So what they say may not represent the thoughts of their brand. So I'd ask you please not to quote them in that sense as representing their companies. Two final caveats before we go on. We're really talking about B2C here, so brands that are close to their consumers rather than more than B2B. And also, we're focusing on products which make sense to market globally, or at least to market in multiple markets. So you wouldn't be looking at a product that would just be applicable for this market. So here's the poll. Here's the question for you. Very simple. I like to keep it simple. Do you agree that global creative equals local disaster? So yes, you agree with the team on this side, or no? And you agree with the team on this side. So I'm going to ask you to please make your votes now. Just to explain as you're doing that how this is going to work, I'm going to ask each team to make a short presentation, making the case for their team's position, and the other team will do the same. And then we're going to open it up to a debate. And as we go through those debates, we will also have questions from you, which will appear up here, which I will try and put to our debaters. So if the results are ready, we'll, if we can throw those up on screen. Ooh. Which is good because it makes it tense, right? Okay, so the majority, interestingly, saying global creative doesn't work. But it's not, it's quite close, right? That's pretty close. Yes. 54 to 46. Now, I'm going to stand aside now, and I'm going to let Yukiko and Go take the floor. So, please.
Thank you, Rob. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Global marketing is always stressful for local marketers. Often, local offices are required to use creative developed by headquarters for the purpose of achieving globally unified creative. In most cases, the marketing headquarters believe that their creative can be accepted in all countries and regions at the same level of the headquarter country, with most cases originating in the United States and Europe. But this is a dream, wishful thinking, especially in countries and regions where the culture is quite different from the Western countries. It is always challenging to adopt such creative. Japan is one of those countries. So local marketers use a lot of energy to make headquarters understand the difference in the culture, nuance, and the sense of their market. How local people feel when they come into contact with global creative. Ladies and gentlemen, who are working for headquarters and developing global creative, do you truly understand each local market culture? And do the local people truly share the exact sense as you do? In my long-term experience as a local marketer, I can say that if headquarters truly understand the local culture and try to understand the differences, we feel very relieved and make it easier to implement the right local communication. However, if not, it's a nightmare. I would like to share one story. One day, headquarters shared the new brand campaign creative. They wanted to launch globally. We, the Japan team, were so shocked. The creative presented a domino of business card. This was anathema. In Japan, business cards are considered an extension of the person. Poorly kept cards indicate either poorly kept person or lack of respect to the person. And there is a lot of rule how to handle the business card, you know? For example, the highest ranking person give out business card first. Cards must be given and received with 2 hands. Cards should be handled face down to the receiver. Cards should be kept as immaculate as possible. If you shove newly received card into the pocket or hand it roughly, it also indicates a lack of respect. You may have ruined entire business deals with careless handling of business card. So the creative depicting business card falling like a domino is unbelievable. Unfortunately, headquarters forced Japan team to use the same creative. And the company disappeared from market. It's not only the reason, but no respect to local culture and rule give big negative impact to business. It's simple. We want to deliver the same message, concept. We must bear in mind the way this concept is communicated will differ depending on the culture and of each country. It is very important to have the right context. So we believe that ideas touching people's heart and creative new behavior are the true creative. To do that, it's very important to understand and respect local culture, history, and sensibility. So, global creative is a disaster of local. Okay, now Go is going to share additional evidence to prove it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Go, and Yuki just explained our point. Actually, especially like I'm creative director, it's a little bit like a creativity kind of thing. It's important for everyone, but especially for me. And one point I want to bring, actually, the Yuki also touched about that, but I'm always thinking the great creativity is coming from the concept and the context. And even like you have a really strong concept, but you ignore the context, that creativity is not that great. And the context, actually, a lot of things is, the consists of the localness, especially for the global marketing. That's something we believe. Even like if you remember there is a memorable dinner for your life, it's not just about the food or the menu. It's gonna be the who you are with or where was it. That kind of context is always really important for the great experience and the great creativity. That's something we really pointed out through this conversation, the reason why the local is very important. And I'm going to talk about the 5 points to support that, the importance of context and the importance of the local, localness. And the first one is pretty easy. I think this is an old global brand did a campaign in Japan and really successful because they behave locally. Mercedes, the little bit like A-class family car type of thing, they did this kind of campaign, and also McDonald's, the global campaign, but they kind of utilize the diversity of the city, in the city of Japan, Tokyo versus Osaka kind of thing. Or even like a Nestle KitKat, they tap in the market here is a little bit more like a, student for the exam, how they can, fill the break through the really stressful like exam season. That's also the very local insight based on. And those global, the brands is really, growing still, and because they behave locally. And a lot of those brands, actually, they started with a little bit like a more global campaign, but they realized, oh, it's not working here, and we need to go locally, and they came back. Second point, those data is obviously, the familiar for you guys, everyone, but the mobile, people spending a lot of time in the mobile, more than TV already. Or by 2020, more than 50% of the purchases is gonna be through the EC. Or this is this year, 2018 will be the year the digital overtakes the TV media spending, which means the media environment already changed, and the more digital, more social, more experience, rather than just the broadcasting the one single message through the TV, which means we need to analyze the people living here through the mobile phone or every day. We need to behave locally more because digital social experience is going to require that kind of behavior for the brand as well. The third one is the left side is the globally top 4 like cosmetic brands, and the right side is Japan, completely different the market positions. And what we want to say here is the way of fighting as a number 1 versus the underdog or number 2, number 3. The strategy or even a solution is going to be completely different. The global stuff might be, developed by okay, we are number one, so that's a global message. But a lot of countries might not in the same situation, and those solutions not gonna work so much. Or this is, like Rob said, I'm based in LA and Tokyo as well. This is my commuting scene in both cities, Tokyo side and the LA side, the 4 or 5, The way of living is different in the countries. So different market positions, issues, the way of living require the different solutions. That's a very natural thing. Fourth point, this is kind of the photo capture, the typical global meeting. 4 countries is gonna be presenting in 5 minutes to the global team, and okay, what's going on in your country in the 5 minutes, and you have to convince the global team. Yeah. And our point, the importance of local is not just about always global people don't understand the local. Actually, the local people also have the problem, which means globally approved. Sometimes people feeling, oh, this is a safer option because global already approved. So I don't want to mess up those decisions in 5 minutes kind of thing. But to succeed the local market, of course, you got to take a bold step rather than the safer option. The fifth point is kind of Rob already touched at the beginning of the session, but culture, language, and even law, different here, there. The Christmas is Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year is much, much bigger than the Christmas. And that's why we are going to do a Christmas campaign globally, including those things. Or tattoo. Japan's still not that great to show in the TV spot. Even if your global campaign featuring the one person wearing the tattoo, that message might be different. Or Kentucky, KFC stuff already explained by the Rob, and of course, the sugar and the healthiness also required a lot of different, the situation for the marketers. Mexico and France, they kind of banned the, sugar food advertisement. And one thing, I remember is when I created a spot, like a global spot, and there is one thing on the table, chocolate, but we couldn't run in France because of the sugar. Or the comparison ad, this is a very old, the historically successful for the US, but the Coca-Cola and the Pepsi, the comparison campaign. But the comparison campaign is not welcome a lot of Asian countries. So no one culture and nor law fits all. That's a pretty basic point as well. So those are the kind of 5 points we want to make it clear why the localness is really important to succeed everywhere. And also, if you don't have that kind of localness, your global brand might be dying or disappearing. That's from us.
Thank you very much, Team Local. Can I call you Team Local? I'm getting into that now, right? Now we're going to hear from Naomi and Sam of the global perspective.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. If you don't mind, I'm going to stand. Out of respect for everyone in the room, we know that creative's job is to drive growth, to position our brands to beat the competition. So there has been a lot of studies, and this one is by Waddell and Cummings, around organizational design and the impact of margin and scale. So companies that can maintain a higher gross margin because they have a higher perceived value. And there's some very interesting learnings coming out through the last 5 years. So over the last 20 years of international companies, you can see an axis. Need for global integration, you want to save cost, you want to make one product and sell it everywhere, versus the need for local responsiveness. You've got to be very good at acquiring and delivering local tastes. Now, the learning over the last 5 years is there's a group of companies that are doing very well by doing both. And they're called transnational orientation companies. And let me just explain that to you. So on this side of the coin, you've got international orientation. These are companies that make a product in their home country and just export it, or just do JVs. But they're not really looking to do a mass scale. Above that, you have very tight controlled headquarters, one product, and sell it out. And that was the typical Apple model. And when I say global to you, that's what you think. Some guy in New York deciding everything. But we're seeing global creative thinking changing. And it's more to do with this side, which is transnational orientation. Companies have realized that we have segments. We have segments of consumers that are similar. Car companies realize that four-wheel drive enthusiasts in Australia, America, and Northern Europe are very similar. Unilever discovered teenage boys across the world are very similar. And they get a global team together from USA, from Italy, from Australia to design global creative. This is not one person in a room in New York, but a global team. And we're seeing global thinking coming together. Down the bottom here is multinational. These are companies that are very strong local bases. And when I was very young and joined marketing, the country manager was king. And you had to pray that he approved your ad and approved your budget. He was king. And what they realized is the scale of that wasn't working for multinational corporations. So transnational global teams, markets coming together to understand one segment for a core creative thought that cuts through is critical. Now, what that does is something very interesting. You have lead market global creative. This is not headquarter, this is lead market. The second, you have best practices and sharing and understanding what's working versus a very myopic view. The next thing is obviously return on investment increases because you are scaling. Your cost of creative is reduced. You can really afford to innovate and really come together for one big creative idea and then execute it versus spinning around and coming up with different ideas and actually making the agencies very rich. And that was the old model. We want to make ourselves in terms of drive economic growth, not the agencies. Obviously, cut-through is critical. And global creative cut-through is delivered through innovation and scale, the big idea, the one that hits you in the heart, quality, and delivered in a really insightful way. Finally, happy creative people are global. Local, always complaining. Local, always upset. This not work here, this neighborhood not right, this flavor not right. Always complaining. Positivity. Positivity is where global creative come in. We're happy. We're happy people. But also, it's diversity. If you have Australian, Japanese, Chinese coming up with a big idea, it's better than just one Australian idea. And that's the core thought of global creative. It's how do we get diversity of thought for the big idea to drive growth. My last point is I really believe digital means global creative thinking, multiple countries coming together is critical. Over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to be launching 5G. 5G networks will transform our economies. It will transform e-commerce. We will look so old-fashioned in about 2 years' time. And the learnings of what works on 5G will happen very quickly. And if you're sitting in your neighborhood and you're only looking at your neighborhood, you're not going to know what's working and you're going to get left behind. So finally, global creative thinking brings ROI, great creative, and great executional learnings fast across traditional and digital thinking. Thank you.
So, hi everyone. I'm from the Shiseido, then the global team tagged with the Sam. So somehow that we stand for the presentation. It's a little bit different attitude from the local. Anyway.
We respect.
Right, we respect. And then, as you know, but I'd like to make sure that what's the role of the marketing and the creative first. And marketing has two roles. One is the short-term sales and the business growth for the profit and investment, of course. And the other is long-term branding to increase user engagement for sustainability and longevity. Needless to say, these roles should be cycled and connected to establish strong brand marketing. Considering local business management, localization must be more effective than local creative. This doesn't apply to just creative, but also media, PRs, and sales activities. However, as many have experienced, there are no benefit of the scale, as he mentioned already, in terms of efficiency. The important question to you is, can you maintain high quality by local creatives? That's the first point from us. So this diagram shows process role of the marketing and the creative. With the diversifying lifestyle and the preference of the consumer and the spread of the networks connecting individuals, it is difficult to communicate to every single person while we're using one content. That's we agree. The stimulation of the ephemeral in one ad campaign cannot help solve the real business issues, even if it attracts consumers momentarily. To execute the global creative, what's important is how much we can sharpen the core idea with the facts and the insights, and be inspired to create new ideas. On the other hand, for sustainable business, it's necessary to provide meaningful value created from the clearly differentiated the brand core to be the one, the only. How is brand consistency kept cohesive when creative contents in the execute under the local circumstance? Storytelling is one voice and one narrative. If you are familiar with the creative process, a team has to produce an overwhelming amount of the work, as well as truly understand the storytelling approach for the brand core and identity to deliver the values. When each local market produces creative separately, they should be aligned one voice and the narrative of the brand. It is time-consuming in terms of the process. Preferably, suggesting centralized control is the better approach for especially luxury brand and emerging brands, except of established global power brands. That is the second point from us. So we tend to be misled by the word global. Today, the role of the global creative is to deliver consistent the recognition and the perception of the brand, not single symbol to consumer in the world. However, if insisted to be a single idea, it must express global insight in the core of the creative. Human being has the universal desire, values, and aspirations. That is a human insight, like love, beauty, hope for peace, whatever. In comparison, local insights stand for more cultural customs and individual ephemeral desires. So I would like to show some example. As you know, this is the iPhone campaign, the last holiday. Ran globally and was great success. So even though runs India, Japan, so it's really great creative. I think, people understand meaning and what's important about the insight in the holiday. So the next one, that's there from Shiseido. So it's more experimental, the creative, but this contents for the social. But somehow it makes the really, based on the Japanese point of view, but even so, it received a positive response from the world. So those Apple and this is more than the 10 million the preview. That's the result.
Thank you. だから気になるくせに目が合うたびに
How many boys in the room? That's a question.
君のその視線
君のその視線
尻目に僕は冷静になってくと夢甘い誘惑には乗らないてかまずかったら匂わせぶりなその仕草お静かな芸者いらない計算自分のままよわかった無理しないでいいんじゃんね君は君のままが一番暇つぶしに逆さぎだよりも夢を磨く見つめてるのは君の方よく見てみな Yeah 仕掛けたのどっち You know what I mean こっち抜け出そうとしてももう Sorry If you wanna play the game もうあなたははめられてる Yeah So you wanna play the game
Yes, I wanna play the game
If you wanna play the game もうあなたははめられてる Yeah So you wanna play the game 罠にかかったのはあなた
So to summarize, the key success point of the global creative is storytelling produced from the outstanding global human insight. Otherwise, it would be hard to create content only from local insight as global creative. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. That was spectacular. Really, really good. Thank you for your contributions. So it's always a good way to win an argument with great creators.
You're being too polite already, Rob.
I beg your pardon?
You're too polite already.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay,
You got it. So I'm just going to open this up perhaps to the local team, having heard from the Global's arguments. Is anything that struck you from that? I was particularly captured by Sam saying that Global's happy and Local's quite miserable. That was maybe one point, but over to you. Any thoughts?
Please don't complain.
Yeah, of course. Or, yes, I'm going to do it. But the one thing I was thinking, because from my experience, like I used to work for Apple like 8 years creating the global campaign. Actually, I kind of expected you guys are going to bring up the Apple is going to be the successful global kind of the approach. But at the same time, the Christmas spot is amazing. But at the same time, like I said, they didn't run China because Christmas doesn't work over there. And they did instead Lunar New Year's campaign. So actually Apple, the communication, especially perspective, they really respect and understand the local market. And the other point, the point about, of course, having the multiple diversity creative as a global core is going to be great. Yes, absolutely. But actually that's also supporting the localness because which means from the brand concepting, having the diversity or local insight is going to be solved to create a better global campaign because already you guys considering the localness. So that's a kind of point.
Yeah, please.
Actually, that as we said, the concept and the context is important, and the context for the message that the global, the same message like the love or the respect to others is universal message. But even I see that the TV commercial, I'm thinking that, for example, the country where have the Islamic religion can be accepted or not? It's my question. When we think about that the global creative, of course, as a global company, we need to make the priority country. And within the priority company, we need to make the effective creative. But actually, if we think about that the global, for example, different region, different culture, it still have the challenges, I feel.
Go was saying, I quite like this, it's not concept times context. It's not just about the food, but it's where you eat it.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that, Sam, perhaps? Naomi?
I think the point, there's 2 points. One, if you don't stand for something, you stand for nothing. And you have to take a stand as a brand. And the Shiseido commercials were extremely well accepted worldwide, especially by millennials. And I think the millennials have a different mindset of what it means to be part of humanity. I think there's a mindset that we're all part of this one planet. If we don't take care of this one planet, it's going to run out. If we don't take care of each other, we're going to be in trouble. And I think that mindset is very different for millennials. The other thing is that if you vote for us, Shiseido is going to give free makeup to everybody. And I want to thank you. So you vote for us, you get free cosmetic.
Naomi, over to you, no pressure.
But I'm adding Sam's, what Sam's saying. So the millennium, yes, and also the targeting the affluent people in global. It's also the same, the values and the lifestyle. So in that case, maybe that we can convey the same context and the contents. But the mid class in Asia, emerging country, we have to think about more local insights.
Okay. So I like your point about human insight being universal, right? So any observations there? If you find a human insight or need in relation to love, whatever it might be, then it travels, right?
Yeah. I think what I was thinking was definitely, especially like nowadays, the millennials and every single situation in globe is kind of requiring a little bit more like a purpose, bigger message for the social. But at the same time, our marketing activities is not just about that. And that kind of thing might be working a little bit more like a top-down marketing. But at the same time, what we got to do is a lot of bottom-up marketing as well. And actually, that percentage of the bottom-up marketing is increasing. And that's more localness requirement we are getting, I think.
So top-down's never going to work.
But the bottom-up has to make a decision. And what global teams do is they get a bottom-up to make a decision and make a call. And in marketing, you have to make a decision, otherwise you are boring. The second thing I'd say is, and I mean this to all the marketers in the room, Japan is, if not one of the most creative countries in the world. Your creativity, your style, your tonality is really loved by many, many nations. And I think the more Japanese we can have on global teams, it is better for marketing. And I worry that we are leaving a lot of Japanese creatives in Japan. And I would love to see more of that creativity and just pursuit of excellence, which you have, into global teams. So I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, but so, Naomi, you're in a global creative role, and either can take this, but you're talking about having to make a decision. And in global level, as Go showed on his slide, and Chris mentioned earlier, never take a brief from a board, right? I think is what he said. So committee, is that the best place to make a decision at a global level?
I think committee is the wrong word.
Right.
The right word is a group of people that are going to make a decision and they're going to debate, but they're going to make the hard call. A committee is too consensus-driven, but you're finding the best teams. And a communication we just saw at the end, you can imagine there were a lot of people in that room very uncomfortable. And there was ultimately a group saying, let's take a risk. That wasn't consensus. It was a feeling that the brand had to have. So I wouldn't call it committee.
Yeah, actually, the Japanese corporations used to be really isolated and doesn't connect to the global situation. So some Japanese corporation maybe a little bit change it and need to more, improve the diversity. So which is, the 360 aspect we have and when we discuss and when we develop something. And it's more connected to the regions, local people. So the important is the communication before the creatives. So the used to be done, and do it. That's the the dialogue. But nowadays, so what's the insight? What's the local the issues or needs? So that we like to all observe this kind of issue, then solve it. That's the way of the working right now.
Okay, so to the local team. So we talk about Japanese brands creating global work, and there's a relatively new thing. Excellent example from Shiseido. But do you think, sort of culturally and from a capability perspective, that makes sense to be going more global?
Actually, I personally believe that the communication is important, and that the diversity of the headquarters side and also the local side is important. But that the culture is different, so that's why each side really need to understand the culture gap. Yeah. For example, it is always said Japanese is always hesitate to hide real opinion, right. and actually that didn't fight or negotiate with headquarters side. But headquarters side also that need to understand the kind of culture gap and make the real situation, real feedback of the creative. That is one of the point. It's important point.
Joe, anything to add?
No, I think having the local people in the global team is going to be great. But at the same time, like I said, that's already saying the importance of the localness. One example, when I did the campaign for the global campaign for the Apple, we knew that's going to be the global campaign. So we had a team from Japan, London, China, US, Mexico, all together sitting 2 weeks. And we created the global campaign because already while developing the global campaign, we individually start thinking about, okay, it's going to work for our culture. It's going to work for our market. So that was really successful because from the beginning of the development, we already start thinking about the localness as well. So that's a kind of the, having the local people in the global is not something, we can ignore the localness.
Yeah, okay. So 3/4 of you are clients here. WFA and JA are obviously client-centric organizations. I'm not going to name the CMO who I heard this from, but was saying to us that every market always tells us that they're unique, and then we just treat them the same, right? Might be a little bit rough. So how much sort of leeway should you be allowing as a global team for your local colleagues? So you have a global concept, and then for the activation or whatever stage of it is, how much leeway do you think, Sam, you should allow?
Yeah, so I've had 2 previous roles that are quite interesting in terms of this area. So I used to run marketing for Starbucks Asia Pacific, and then marketing for MasterCard. Starbucks is a very successful brand in Japan, China, USA, the rest of the world. And what we found was specifically, interestingly enough, areas like food. Food needs to have a real expertise. So what we did is we created a global team on food. To understand what is the expectations of an Asian consumer on food at a coffee shop versus an American. Right. And they were very different. And that enabled us to build a platform of food that went back into the US. So that's where that global thinking and segmentation thought really is important. And at MasterCard, you really saw a lot of data. And you really do see that there are segments that cross borders. Segments don't live within countries, they do cross borders. And especially the affluent consumer. The affluent brands have really understood the importance of global positioning and to maintain that price premium. And what they do really well is learn fast. And they learn fast what's happening in Japan, what's happening in China. The interesting facts around in China at the moment, the size of the logo, if it's too big, even on expensive bags, is seen as a little bit tactical. We need to reduce that. But because they've got global teams learning together and that segment understanding, they do it fast. Toyota was brilliant at understanding four-wheel drives, and the four-wheel drive driver in Australia, US, and Northern Europe had the same needs. And so you could cut across borders. And I think those segment view saves you a lot of cost.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't get hugely into efficiencies, but absolutely. So any views from the local team? There's a question we had from the audience, and what are your thoughts on global creative with local variation?
I think, the global creative with the local variation is definitely, we need, if we think that global creative, it's going to work with a little bit twisted about the translation or the copy, or maybe swapping out the couple of scenes and the changing. That kind of variation is going to be good, but at the same time, that's why localness is really important.
Yeah, actually, for the MasterCard, that the Japan campaign is a little customized. The concept is same, but how to express, how to execute is different. The kind of the allowance of the adaptation is very important, I think.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit. Please. So that now here is really talking about the black and white, but so every single day we heard cross-border, the transgenders, or seamless, or whatever. So we don't have a really, this kind of the gap. So, which is maybe that we have some gray zone, and it's not global, it's not local. So maybe that we might need to combine together hybrid way. That's one idea to me.
So go on.
Yeah, I was just looking at the question here around Middle East proximity of man and woman. There's a question, great expose, but surely global Apple might not work in the Middle East with proximity of man and woman. And that's something that I think is an interesting point of view. And I know a number of brands are in certain cultures saying, you know what, this is our values. And our values to us are important. And this is what we stand for. And so I'm seeing in a lot of global brands standing up for, this is what we stand for. And if you don't like us, that's okay. But this is what we stand for. And I'm thinking that that's better creative as well.
One thing I was thinking was, we talked about the concept, the context. That's a little bit more like a global and the local. But maybe without global, really local campaign is going to work for the global, effective. But if you don't have the localness and just doing the global thing, and it might not working. So which one you can choose? If you have to choose one, maybe local. That's my point maybe I'm making at the very end.
Yes. Concept and context. Even if there is a very beautiful message, beautiful context, but if we don't have the right context and thinking of the local doesn't work. We need to think about the cost effectiveness, but the real purpose of the marketing is how to touch the heart, how to make the movement. So think about effectiveness. We need to think about context.
So my point is, factually, the luxury brands that have got the highest perceived value are ones with global creative. They are the ones that command a higher premium for their brands. And that execution and need for that perceived value for us as companies is critical. Without growing your gross margin, you're not going to get a marketing budget. There is no company in the world that will give you marketing budget if your gross margin is going down. And the reason the luxury brands have done well is that they've increased perceived value, especially at the affluent level. And the affluent are very similar the world over in terms of needs and wants. So I would say that from a financial perspective, the global creative positioning has worked.
Final word?
And the style of working, maybe. So then even the local, don't think about only local. Then working for the global, don't think about only the global. So maybe think globally and, act locally. Yep. That's more, it's not compromising that to make a distance shorter.
So thank you all very much. And whoever's the winner or loser, really excellent contributions, and thank you for taking that kind of leap of faith and joining us on stage. So you can take out your mobiles and please vote. So again, the poll was, do you agree that global creative equals local disaster? And if you could just cast your votes here.
Oh.
Not going to change. Not going to change.
Where's the comparison? Oh, there you go. Oh, look at that. Look at that.
Oh, this.
We will.
So the yes team.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm sure as we got towards the end of that debate, we started to realize that this is about balance, of course, rather than completely right or wrong. So it's about smart models, for some things I came from, a right balance of the people. Category is obviously critical, and the final thing is about client leadership. And I think all of our debaters here have genuinely shown leadership. So thank you so much for your contributions today. Thank you.